Big time privilege for me. By the way, my name is Pete Souza, but it is a big time privilege for me to be back here again with Robinson High School to talk a little bit about addiction and recovery from alcohol and drugs. I had a chance to connect with you all last year, which meant a lot to me. It also meant a lot. I was eating lunch at Kim's, the diner on Waco Drive, in I guess it was like May or June, and a couple of young students were looking at me and pointing, and I was thinking, like, what is wrong with me? What did I do wrong? Why are these people talking about me? And it turned out they were a couple of Robinson Rockets. They asked, "Are you Pete Souza?" I said, "Yes." And they said, "We spoke to you, or you spoke to us about alcohol and drug addiction." So I was like, I was shocked, taken back, and honored, and just like I'm all those things right now, to have the chance to talk to you today. I wanted to share my story with you all about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. I'm sober 13 years, and it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And it's not something that I would embark on or start to do until I was absolutely driven into the ground, um, and beaten into submission, because that's what happened with my alcohol and drug abuse. By the time I stopped, me personally, I had nothing left. But just to start the story for you, I grew up outside of Philadelphia, um, was raised by two great parents. My father's side of the family, and it was pointed out to me early on in my childhood, there was a lot of alcoholism there. And they used to say alcohol doesn't run in our family, it gallops. And there was no question about that. My dad's side of the family, his sisters, his brother, a lot of my cousins, his nieces and nephews were addicted, and I saw it play out right before my eyes. And my father was what you would call a functional alcoholic. He would go to work, he would come home. I started to notice that sometimes his moods would change, and I would learn that those mood changes weren't just dictated on like life stuff that happens to us, but it was had a lot to do with how much alcohol he had consumed, or maybe even if he didn't drink, sometimes he would be wound very tight. And looking back now, I noticed that a lot of my behaviors and a lot of the behaviors of my brothers and myself, um, were were a result of that, right? How my father would come home from work, whether he was happy, whether he was mad, that affected us a lot. And I didn't know any of that until I really looked back, um, and had that lens of being sober. The first time I drank alcohol, and I tell this to people, I had a very good childhood. Was involved in sports. That's a big part of my story. But everything was going pretty well. I was, like a lot of us are when we're younger. Maybe some of you are right now. I know I was. You're a little awkward. You're trying to find your way in high school. Um, and I drank at that point in time. When I was a freshman in high school, I drank alcohol with some friends, and I can remember feeling like this was a magic potion that had come over me. And I can remember thinking, like, wow, where has this been? This is going to be the answer to all my problems. Now I have courage. Now I can talk to females. Now I like to tell lies, right? I can stand up to the bully who confronts me. All of these problems were resolved just by taking a sip of this liquid, or more than a sip. And I tell my story like this, right? When I was in eighth grade, this is how alcohol affected me. When I was in eighth grade, I was terrified to go to the high school or to the grade school dance, right? When I was in ninth grade and I started to drink on weekends when I could not wait to get there. And, I would come to discover that this was all a lie. Alcohol and drugs, they were telling me this lie that, like, I wasn't good enough and I needed this to participate in whatever. And that was all not true. I really had to find out the hard way. As I got into the later stages of high school, I started to take a lot of pills. My mom had pills around the house that, whether she had a prescription for um, Oxycontin or Oxycodone or whatever, or Vicodin, or, the hardcore Tylenol, what they call it, Tylenol 3, or they called it Tylox when I was a kid, or Tylenol with codeine. I would take those because she wouldn't finish the prescriptions because she wasn't an addict, right? An addict like me. I'm like, wow, how could she couldn't take this stuff? I take it and I feel great. And then I would also take speed before I played football because I started to play really well football. And ultimately, I got a scholarship to go to college to the University of Richmond to play football. And my first big consequence came when I was a senior in high school. And it was the second part of my senior year. I had been taking a lot of pills. I had been drinking a lot. I had been partying. I'm still in high school, right? And I was playing in a Philadelphia football all-star game in the summer, going into the summer, and they checked me. They had to give me a physical to see that I could play. And they gave me this physical, and the doctor noted, hey, like there's something wrong with your heart. You need to see a cardiologist. I went to see a cardiologist. The cardiologist said, you have something called cardiomyopathy, and there's no way we're going to let you play sports. You can't play football in college. It could have been caused by a virus that went through your body, or it could have been caused by alcohol and drug abuse. And right away I was like, hey, I'll take that virus over there, because I wanted to continue drinking and using drugs. And it certainly didn't stop there. That to me, looking back, is a real indication that I was in big time trouble, because I suffered this great consequence, and I just kept going. I got to college. They kept me on scholarship. The University of Richmond did. And I got to college, and I was now able to drink pretty much as I wanted to. And so I drank all the time, and I smoked pot all the time. I tried to smoke marijuana, smoke weed, whatever. I tried to come back off of taking the pills because I felt like, okay, this is the real problem. Meanwhile, I was just constantly making mistakes under the influence of alcohol and drugs, not treating people the right way. My priorities were all misaligned. I knew that I wanted to get into broadcasting. This is when I was in high school. I knew that I loved sports. I had so many great, healthy relationships in my life. But the moment I started to drink, that came first, and all that other stuff came second. I did fortunately, graduated college. I got a really good job working in New York. I was working in sports, working for a sports agent, and I started to do drugs again, hardcore drugs. Like I started to snort a lot of cocaine. I started to take pills again, basically anything I could get my hands on. And I really was in love with alcohol and drugs. And it all turned on me. I had so many opportunities where I was gifted this, whether it was a good job or a good relationship. And sooner or later, I could not help the fact that my use of alcohol or my use of drugs was going to make these opportunities blow up right in front of me. And I constantly did that. I actually tried to stop drinking once when I was about 27. And there was a part of me, and I had every reason to stop. I had lost everything in my life. Again, I mentioned to you all, I had a good job. I had, opportunities, but I had given all that back because of alcohol and drugs. And I tried to stop drinking, but I just couldn't. I stopped for about 3 months, and I was unable to not. I had this idea that if I was going to be able to connect with my friends, I had to, whether it was we had to smoke weed or, I had to drink with them. So I started to smoke weed. I didn't drink, but I was smoking weed. For me as an addict, that does not work, because the moment I put something in my mind or in my body that's going to change the way I think, I'm just on the road to another drink and on the road to worse situations as far as alcohol and drugs was concerned. So I started, everything picked back up right at the age of 27. And I did start to get other opportunities. I worked in pro basketball. I worked for the Sixers. I worked for the Charlotte Hornets. I did public relations. I thought that everything was great. And then sooner or later, the more I started to drink again, it started to completely just crush my soul. And by the time I was absolutely done, I had what you call the gift of desperation. And I was drinking a lot. I was taking drugs, and I was mentally to a point in my life where I thought this was a good way to live. Mind you, everyone around me was looking at me like, hey, you need help. Those friends who I thought wanted me to connect with them through smoking marijuana, they didn't want that. They wanted the people who loved me wanted me to be okay. And I finally got to the point where I had that gift of desperation, and I had tried to get sober before by going to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I just couldn't get it. I wasn't ready to stop. And finally a guy took me to dinner one night, a guy who was sober, and he told me, he said, part of my story is going to treatment. He said, that's probably something you should look at as well. And I always want to say, I don't know what happened. I do know what happened. I had like a spiritual experience, and God opened up this small window for me that I was able to fall through on the other side. And on that other side was a life beyond my wildest dreams. The moment I went to treatment, I remember feeling like this huge weight had been lifted. And people said to me, if you get sober, or if you stop drinking and using drugs, because they would say this to me when I was at my rock bottom, which there were a couple of those, but they would say, you never have to feel this way again. And if you're out there and you're watching this, you know who you are if you've had these feelings before. And you never have to feel that way again. You don't. By stopping drinking and by really finding a higher power, God is who I call it, and taking suggestions from other people who had been addicted, and now we're living this free life, my entire being and person changed. And it was a long road to get there. I went to rehab. I lived in a recovery house, what they would call a halfway house, for about 5 months after that. Remember, I had worked in the NBA, college football, got a scholarship. I had all these great connections and relationships that I had burned to the ground. So now I'm back living in a halfway house, going to AA meetings and getting sober, but I was the happiest I'd ever been. I was willing to take suggestions and go to any lengths to stay sober to keep this feeling alive. And that burning fire I had moved me through the recovery house. I had to work at a KFC in the recovery house. That was not something I was accustomed to doing. I was in my 30s and I was taking orders for fried chicken and stuff. It was not exactly where I had seen my career ending up, but I had a sense of humor about it. When I got the job at Kentucky Fried Chicken, I couldn't work the register. I was terrified. And by the time I was done working, I remember this one guy was a real jerk. He pulled up to the KFC and he said, he was complaining. I had the headset on. I was working the drive-thru, and this guy's complaining and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm going to mess with this guy. And I said, hold on, sir. We'll be with you in 1 second. And he's like, what's going on back there? I said, oh, one of the chickens got loose. Remember, it's Kentucky Fried Chicken. And the guy goes, you got live chickens back there? I said, no, sir, we do not. I was messing with you. Just wait your turn. And like that moment, I always look back on, and it shows that I was like embracing like life again. I was having perspective. I was doing the next right thing and doing things that filled me. They say if you want to have self-esteem, do esteemable things. Well, that's what I was doing. I started to through the a program of recovery. I started to mend relationships. I started to get back in the game professionally. I started to meet people who you start to, when you're drinking and using drugs, and again, some of you know this, you end up hanging out with a group of people who are doing the same thing you're doing. And a lot of times, and it's not anything wrong with any of us or any of those people per se, like the way we are made or created, but they're not the people you want to spend time with to move your life forward in a made me feel better about myself and who put me in positions to succeed. Part of that success for me was I got back into the NBA. I got a chance to broadcast for the Charlotte Hornets. That was a place where I had kind of burned my reputation per se, or relationships, to the ground. These people found out that I got sober. They allowed me to come back and work for them. That led to a job in television news in Charlotte. Ultimately, I ended up getting a job in Central Texas, right? Working on the news in Waco at KWTX. I knew that I loved doing the news, and it was also something that I needed to get better as a broadcaster, because I always had wanted to do that. And every day for 2 hours, 2.5 hours for 8 years, I got to do the morning news and become a better broadcaster. Towards the tail end of that, I had always wanted to call games for ESPN, and I had done some of that, but obviously I let all that go to alcohol and drug addiction. Worked through a program and getting sober. Any relationships that had deteriorated because of that, I had been able to put back together. And I all of a sudden was in a position where I got a job working at ESPN, calling games, football, basketball, baseball, softball on a national level. Sometimes if you or your parents watch Baylor or Big 12 games, like I may be calling those games. Remember now, I was the guy who had absolutely nothing 13 years ago and no prospects. And I rose from those ashes to a place where I have opportunities now. And let me be the first to tell you, this is not of me. This is other people who have shown me the way. This is God who has relieved me of a lot of the stress that I have when I turn over my frustrations and all my questions to him or her. My whole life has changed. And I could talk to you guys forever about all the positives. And if you have any questions, you can find me on social media. Pete Souza. I'm not hard to find. Now, I want to answer some questions. My good friend Mindy Hancock gave me some questions that you guys might have. So I want to read them. I'll read them again out loud, and then I'll answer them. Okay. Here's the first question. Can you share some of the challenges you faced during your journey? Great question. And this applies to younger people. I was a younger person, not necessarily as young as you are, but when I got sober finally, I still consider myself young at heart, but I was younger. I was in my early 30s. I know that might seem old, but I still wanted to be social. I still wanted to have relationships with females. I wanted to meet someone. And all of those things in my previous life when I was drinking and using were predicated on alcohol or drugs. I would always take something to do something or to be around people. And I thought that all that stuff was going to go away. And let me be the first to tell you, that was not the case. Once I started to do those esteemable things and started to have good things come into my life, whether it was work or personal, I started to feel better about myself and have a confidence that no longer was built on substance. It was built on like real substance, not alcohol and drug substance, like connections and relationships with people. So I thought that I was never going to have a social life. I was never going to have a girlfriend, and none of that is true. I have a girlfriend now. I probably drive her crazy, but I do have one, and I love her. And I have so many great friends. And socially, I have to tell people no now. When I got sober, nobody was calling me, or before I got sober. Now I have options, which is great. All right, second question. What has been the most rewarding part of being sober for you? I would have to say reconnecting with my family. I have amazing relationships. And I can tell you, my brother Kevin, who was a hero of mine, died 2 years ago from cancer. He had melanoma. But the fact that I had gotten sober and he and I spent 11 years together, 10, 11 years together, reconnecting and becoming so close over the course of those 10 years, that was a total gift. I consider myself right now to be in the bonus round of life. And that was a reward, right? Looking back on it, yes, of course, I wish I'd never lost him, but to have had magical moments with him in sobriety was pretty awesome. Here's another one. How did you find the support you needed during your recovery? For me, I reached out to other people that I knew had gotten sober. They're not hard to find. And I reached out to them, and then they put me in touch with support groups. My support group, what I do is I go to Alcoholics Anonymous. It really helps me. That's my deal. I never say to anybody, that's how you got to get sober. However you stop, drinking or using, however you get sober, that's great, as long as you get sober. But for me, my support group or other people who have gone before me and drank and used and were now sober, and the support of AA. 2 more questions. Are there specific moments or experiences that were turning points in your recovery? Yes, I'll tell you a great story. I'm happy you asked. So at the end of my rope, I was working in Charlotte, right, for the NBA team there. They were actually called the Bobcats at the time. Now they're the Hornets. Michael Jordan was the owner. I was doing some radio stuff for the Bobcats. Obviously, Michael Jordan, the best player of all time, owned the team. So I had a moment with him where I was on drugs because that's what I did. And I was very edgy and uncomfortable because I had taken too much drugs, right? Surprise, I'm a drug addict. We're terrible chemists, by the way. And Michael Jordan passed me at a game and he tapped my shoulder. And I just jumped. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even want to like be here. He like scared me, you know? And here I was working what could be considered a great job, doing what I always wanted to do. And the greatest basketball player of all time is just kind of moving past me, like showing me a little bit of love, trying to get to his seat on the court. And all I wanted to do was get out of there and drink a vodka tonic. Okay, now that was obviously a low place, right? Fast forward like 6 or 7 years, not even, maybe 5 or 6. I'm sober. I was sober for 3 years at this time. And I got a job back in Charlotte for the Hornets. And one time, I'm not going to sit here and tell you Michael Jordan knew my name, but he knew I was the tall guy that worked for him. I'm sitting down, but I'm taller. And he walked by me in the hallway and he kind of brushed by me and just patted me on the shoulder. Like, and I was like, I cannot believe that God has given me another chance, you know? And it was something for me that reminded me, like, just keep going. Keep going. And there are other things that like that. I could tell you about a lot of them, but all that came with time, and hard work. And, you know, it still comes. I still have really tough days, really tough, but I also have way more good days than bad days. Okay. Last one. What was your experience with navigating personal relationships after becoming sober? It's a great one to finish up on. Again, I never thought that I would have the confidence to like date any before I got sober. I never thought that I would be able to welcome people back into my life, who I had considered people who I had burned, right? You know, relationships, whether it was family, friends, you know, women that I was with. I never thought that I would be able to rebuild those bridges. And I didn't do it. God did it and time did it. But it was a day by day thing. And, you know, when I was scared or nervous about reconnecting with someone or going on a date, I would call someone else who was in recovery and talk to them about these crazy thoughts I'm having. Oh my God, I'm thinking I'm going to show up on the date and I'm going to fall over and knock the table over. That's probably not going to happen, but you tell yourself that stuff. You tell yourself that stuff, and it's not true. But so I would say I wasn't worried about navigating personal relationships. I was worried about getting sober. And by working and being worried about getting and staying sober, I was able to mend all those relationships. And that came again from God, from 12 steps, which are in AA, and, you know, from connecting with other people in recovery. So that was a long deal. I hope Mindy doesn't get mad at me because I think I went past my time, but I am so thankful to be with you guys. By the way, this is the Pete Souza Show. I do this in Waco on Rogue Media Network every day at 11 o'clock. I also have a podcast about sobriety. It's called The Payoff with Pete, where I talk to people who are going through tough times or who have gone through tough times and have gotten sober. But it means a lot to me to share my story with you. Again, you have any questions, anything, Pete Souza, just hit me with a DM. We'll talk about it. All right. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much for having me.